Okay, hello everyone. It's our next Zoom meetup, this one on the subject of medical. We're just waiting for a few stragglers to come in. They're just arriving in the waiting room now, so we should get going with the Zoom pretty quickly. This is Colin Geddes, your favorite race director, and Tess. You have to unmute, Tess.
Sorry, I'll have to do that again. Good evening, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for taking the time to join us again.
So just to go over some of the housekeeping issues, we'll have the usual rules. So during the presentation, feel free to leave messages in the chat function. Tess will be monitoring that and we'll pick up any questions you ask. So don't worry if you don't think they're being answered, they'll be maybe answered at the end in the Q&A session. And for people who would prefer to ask the questions directly at the end in the Q&A session, that's totally fine as well. During the presentation, everyone will be on mute, just so that Josh can get on with his actual presentation. He'll be happy to answer any questions you have of purely a medical nature. So I'm not going to steal too much of Josh's thunder here, other than to say that we're extremely pleased to have Dr. Josh Mularella as the medical director for the G2G Ultra. He has been with the G2G Ultra since 2013, and he is our medical director. So he's a board-certified emergency medicine physician and the director of EMS and pre-hospital medicine for Cambridge Health Alliance in Massachusetts. He'll explain, he's got an immense amount of experience and knowledge in wilderness medicine, which is really important for looking after competitors and people in the wild, such as you guys. So without any further ado, I'd like to hand it over to Dr. Josh.
Okay, you can hear me okay? Yes?
Totally fine.
Okay. So I am Dr. Josh. It's nice to meet all of you. I think many of you I already know, but some I don't. So starting a few years ago, we started doing these Zoom talks, and I kind of used it as an opportunity to give a medical lecture, sort of the medical briefing before the G2G, which I thought was helpful. So much of what I would like to tell the runners isn't really helpful once you're there. So it's kind of nice to get a medical briefing a few months out. Having said that, this year I wanted to do something a little bit differently, as opposed to just giving the standard medical briefing talk. I wanted to talk about medical clearance, which I think is something that many runners, even experienced runners, don't really quite understand. Having said that, I believe Tess is going to send all of you a video of a medical briefing talk I gave a couple of years ago. And I encourage all of you to check out the Medical Corner, which is on the G2G website. I already put the link in the chat somewhere. So the title of this talk is medical clearance, but because that's the most commonly used term, but clearance is kind of a misnomer. People get their forms signed by their doctors, and they kind of are under the impression that they're cleared and that nothing bad can happen. But unfortunately, that's not really the case. So really, we're going to talk about medical screening. Just to give you a brief intro into my background, Colin already said a lot of this, but my day job is I'm an emergency medicine doctor. I've been doing this for over a decade, just outside of Boston. I have a lot of pre-hospital experience as well. I used to be a Navy medic for 6 years, mostly with the Marines, and I did what's called a fellowship in wilderness medicine. If you're not familiar with that term, basically after your basic residency training, you can do specialty training in a fellowship. There's a lot of fellowships that would be useful in emergency medicine. This isn't really one of those, but it was a fun year of traveling and doing courses and like search and rescue and how to build a fire. The niche of my fellowship was actually working at staged races like Grand to Grand. I did 5 as a fellow, if I remember, and I've done a few other races since then. I only mention this because I'm not just some guy off the street. I actually have some idea of what I'm doing. Quick disclaimer, my poor puppy had surgery on his paw the other day. He's in the cone of shame. The door is open to the backyard, but if you hear any crying or barking, I apologize up front. So this is what we're going to talk about today. So what exactly is medical clearance? Why do we do medical clearance? And then we're going to talk about the G2G medical form. I'm going to give you some advice on how to fill it out. At the end, we'll talk about some foot care and just some basic medical recommendations that I think are useful, having done this for 10 years. So as far as why we do medical screening at G2G, it comes down to 2 main reasons. The first one is just to kind of help me help you. It helps with medical planning. It helps with supply. Could I do this without knowing this? Absolutely. That's what most races do. They don't know anything about the runners per se, but this isn't your typical race. Even if you've done a remote ultramarathon before, I think people will have a false sense of security that you think that you're a lot closer to town, into a hospital than you actually are. And so this happens quite frequently where a runner will come into a checkpoint, they'll drop out, and they kind of assume that within 20 minutes, they're going to be whisked back to Kanab sitting in a hotel room. And that's just not the case. It can take hours to get people off the course. And so anything that I can do to mitigate that, to prevent any medical issues, is worthwhile. So that's the main reason why I do it. The second reason, which is the main reason for you to do medical screening, is because it encourages you to do something that you wouldn't do otherwise. And that's to sit down with your primary care team and have an honest discussion about how you're feeling, any medical issues you have, any family history you have, and to talk about things that you could possibly do or address before coming out to Grand to Grand. Now, why do I want you to do this? Pretty simple. We don't like to talk about this, but people die doing races. It's not that common, but there's multiple studies looking at this. And depending on what study you're looking at, we're looking at 1 to 2 people out of 100,000 runners die every year. And it doesn't sound like a lot, and it's not. But if you consider that, I think last year there was around 2 million people just in the US doing some kind of endurance event, these numbers start to creep up. And these are just people who died during the race. This isn't someone who passes out. This isn't someone who maybe has a cardiac arrest and they get them back. This isn't someone who dies after the race. So again, like these numbers start to get a little bit higher. And then you account for the fact that oftentimes these deaths just go unreported because people don't want other people to know that somebody died at their race. So the numbers are higher than we may like to admit. We're still talking about very low numbers, but it doesn't mean it should be ignored. And it happens in ultras. This is just from the past couple of months. You can Google this. Somebody died in the French Alps, probably weather related. Somebody died a couple of months ago in an ultra in Vietnam. Most of the time, there's no like autopsy, so you don't really know if it was a weather thing, whether it was a heart thing. But chances are, if you've been doing this for a while, I'm willing to bet that either you know somebody personally who has died, or you have a friend of a friend who has died. I had a good friend from high school who, when he was 30, was training for a triathlon, went for like a very short swim, just came out of the water, said, I don't feel good, and died. Nobody knows why. There was somebody who did Grand to Grand years ago, did fine, subsequently went to do another stage ultra and was doing okay, going a bit slow. And then the last stage of the race, which if you've done these races, you know the last day is kind of like a joke. You just go to take photos. 6 miles, and he just collapsed in the middle of the road. And they eventually got him back, but sadly he ended up dying from organ failure a few weeks later. So even if you've done an event like this before, doesn't mean that you're immune, or there's nothing potentially going on under the hood. And if you look at the studies where they have an idea, they think of why people collapse, you can tend to put them in a few specific buckets, but there's a lot of overlap. So heat issues can cause electrolyte issues, which can exacerbate an arrhythmia, et cetera. We're going to kind of go through the big reasons, the big buckets of why people have issues, and then how medical screening can come into play. So environmental, I'm sure most of you have heard of this case. I believe it was 2021. There was an ultra in China. It was very exposed. It was a mountain ultra. Bad weather came in and 21 people died. I think one runner actually committed suicide, if I remember correctly. Now, this was more of a race director issue, if I recall, and I think they're actually in jail somewhere in China. And this is definitely the outlier. This is something that we need to be aware of. Environmental issues come up all the time. A lot of it is just bad luck. There's not much you can do about it. But if you're looking at the two more common reasons, being heat stroke, which is hyperthermia, and hypothermia, being too cold, there are certainly medical issues and medications that can predispose you to this. So these are the things that I look for on your form, and things that your primary care doctor should be looking at as well. Considering we're still a few months out, there's still time to maybe tweak some of your medications if it's going to be an issue. Trauma, I mean, this is just part of the game. We're talking about trail races, mountain races, races at altitude, people running at night. It's unfortunate, but people will fall and get injured. Somebody just died at one of the UTM bases like a few months ago. Fortunately, at G2G, most of the traumatic injuries are localized to the camp crew. It doesn't mean that you're not going to get hurt. People fall all the time. You can step on like cactus spines, scorpions, spiders, things that aren't necessarily going to like kill you, but can definitely end your race or make it very uncomfortable for the week. So just be careful. Medical screening wise, the one thing to keep in mind is we encourage you to get a tetanus vaccine before coming out, because that's not something we can do once you're here. Electrolytes, I'm sure most of you have heard about the more common one being hyponatremia, which is low salt. These cause more issues at marathons and not as much at ultramarathons. When it comes to hyponatremia, which again is low sodium, it's not necessarily an issue with not taking in enough salt, unless you look like the guy in the photo and you're just like sweating salt. Most of the time it's from drinking too much water or like overhydration. So the reason this happens at marathons a lot, so if you've ever gone to like the Boston Marathon, they have a checkpoint every mile and they have water every checkpoint. So people who are out there for 5-6 hours, they're doing a lot of walking and they'll stop at every checkpoint and drink water. And that's when you run into issues. And these people, I mean, you can get anywhere from just looking a little bit like drunk, like a little unsteady. It can cause seizures, coma, death. Fortunately, at most ultra marathons, especially G2G, like you don't have access to water. So you can't really overhydrate by design. This becomes more of an issue once you get to like 100-mile races and beyond, if you have crews, because then you have people tend to, again, do a lot of walking and there's a lot more drinking water. But at G2G, not much of an issue so far. And this is really the main one I want to talk about. So cardiac issues, most of the time, if you hear about somebody dropping dead at a young age playing sports, this is what it comes down to. And there's a few different reasons which we're going to talk about. And just like the other groups, there's a lot of overlap between them. I'm not going to get too into the weeds for you guys for this, but when it comes to structural, again, there's a lot of heart issues that you can have. Structural issues, there's two that tend to come up the most. So there's something called hypertrophic cardiomyopathy and arrhythmogenic right ventricular dysplasia. What this basically means, the top one is that the left side of the heart gets too big, especially the wall between the left and the right side. And so if you start exerting yourself and running, that wall can actually prevent blood from being pumped out of the heart, and the heart basically shuts down and you just collapse. The bottom one is an issue with the right side of the heart, where it gets kind of like fatty and scarred. That can lead to like issues pumping blood and a lot of arrhythmias. These are both genetic. There's a spectrum, so maybe somebody in your family has had this, maybe you know nothing about it. There is things that we look for on an ECG that can kind of indicate that maybe you have this, but sometimes an ECG can be totally normal. So it's helpful, but it's not 100%. And the icing on the cake is that even if you weren't born with any genetic problems, if you're someone who exercises a lot, you can actually develop structural problems. So if you're really into endurance and all the changes sustained with cardiovascular fitness, you know that your heart gets kind of bigger, your stroke volume goes up, which is why your resting heart rate can go down. And the problem is that if you do a lot of endurance events over and over and over, especially these really long races, you get a lot of inflammation in the heart that can lead to scarring, and a lot of what was initially a good adaptive response can become maladaptive. And so it's pretty common for runners to get arrhythmias like atrial fibrillation, but it can lead to scarring, fibrosis. It can lead to disease in the arteries. I mean, it can cause problems. Not very common, but it's something that can happen. So even if you've been checked 10 years ago and you were fine, it doesn't mean that you're always going to be fine. Electrical issues, and these tend to be either with the way the electricity flows through the heart itself, or just issues with like sodium, potassium, and other electrolytes causing the electricity. So again, there's like three main ones that we look for. One is called Brugada syndrome, which is an issue with sodium, I believe, long QT syndrome, and something called WPW, which is where you can get current stuck in a loop. These are things, again, the top two are definitely genetic, but you may not have any symptoms until you're older in life. And even though there's things we look for on an ECG, again, it's not always there. You can have sometimes like a normal ECG. WPW, I didn't realize you can actually acquire as you get older. And I know this because I diagnosed myself with WPW. I bought some portable ECG monitor for $1,000 and I was trying it out and I'm like, oh, I have WPW. I've never had any symptoms from it, but it's something that I now have and something I'm aware of. The last one you can see at the bottom, it's called catecholamine-induced ventricular tachycardia. What this basically means is that if you have adrenaline or like a surge of like epinephrine, such as when you're running a race, just that surge of hormones can put you into a fatal arrhythmia. And the problem with this is that it's only induced by like hormones. So when you go to get an ECG and you're sitting in a chair and you feel fine, it's going to be totally normal. It's not going to be until you go sprinting down the road and you're just going to collapse. There's also been a few cases of runners who have run a marathon, felt totally fine, and then in the minutes to hours after a race, had massive heart attacks. There's actually a study in 2012 looking at the Boston Marathon. They had two runners, one in his 30s and one in his 40s. Finished the race, good time, and both of them within, I believe, 10 to 20 minutes had chest pain, had a obviously abnormal ECG and needed to be rushed to the hospital. And they both had huge clots in their arteries that needed to be stented. The thing at the bottom here is also something that's kind of new over the past decade or so. It's something called lipoprotein A. You may have heard it on different blogs as LP(a). It's a kind of cholesterol that's very good at clogging arteries, is the best way to put it. It's genetic, but if you have this, so that I've known two people in the 30s who just running or biking, just sudden like death. Both of them were actually brought back and they're both doing fine, but this was the reason for both of them, and they weren't related. And I bring this up because this is something that you can have checked by your doctor to see if you have this. And if you do have this, there's ways of treating it. But if you get like a standard cholesterol panel, this isn't something that they look for. All right. So those are all the reasons that you can run into issues. The problem now is like, what do you do with that information? You can't have everyone who is going to do a race, they can't all go get like an EKG, an echocardiogram, a stress test, cardiac MRI. It's just not feasible. Imagine if every kid who wants to play high school sports needed to do all this. So the European recommendations used to be a 12-lead ECG at a minimum for everyone. And then there was certain like criteria and checklists that they would go through to see if you needed more. Many of you may have come across this if you ever wanted to do like the Paris Marathon. There was like MDS, you needed to go get like this medical certificate signed and you need to get like an ECG. That seems to have changed because I went to the Paris Marathon website yesterday because I was going to download the medical certificate to show you like what they ask for. And that's gone away. They now have this like 10-minute medical online training that you have to watch, kind of similar to what I'm giving you today. And that's kind of it. And then you just kind of acknowledge that, yes, I'm going to go see my doctor. So I don't know where that came from, but it used to be in Europe that they would recommend that everybody, even kids, had an ECG. The US, they don't really do that, partly because we just have a lot of people tend to be spread out, and it's just not feasible for every person who does sports to get an ECG. It'd be really expensive, it would be tying up a lot of appointments. So even though they acknowledge that it would be a good thing, it's not mandated because it would be very difficult to actually mandate. This is something that they use in the US from the American Heart Association, kind of like a checklist to go through. And what they typically do is as long as you don't meet any of these criteria, then you're probably okay. If you do meet one of these criteria or answer yes to any of these questions, then that means that you have to go get an ECG and probably like a stress test, stress echo. But the problem with all these screenings is, as you would expect, they're not 100%. So even if you answer no to all of these questions, it doesn't mean that something bad isn't going to happen. So what I recommend, so you don't have to do any of this. I don't mandate you get any testing done unless it's requested by your primary care doctor. I would strongly encourage all of you, especially if you've never had one before, to go get a 12-lead ECG. It's non-invasive, it's very quick, it's very cheap. Even if you've had one before, but it's been a couple of years, do it again. Like I said, I had multiple ECGs in the military, which were totally normal, and now I have WPW. So things can change, and it's always good to have a good baseline. I recommend, I'm a huge proponent of blood work, not necessarily just for like cholesterol, but just like in general. It's a good thing to know your body. If you've never had your LP(a) level checked, I would strongly encourage you to do so. Even if your primary care doctor thinks it's nonsense and has no idea what you're talking about, at least in the US, there's many websites where you can just go online and you can pay and order your own blood tests. You may have to pay like a $5 physician fee, but then you can go to a nearby lab, have your blood drawn, and they'll send you the results. So you don't necessarily need your doctor to sign off on this, at least in the US. And if possible, if you can get like a stress test, stress echo, I think that would be great. Because again, there's a lot of things that you can't necessarily pick up on an ECG. It's probably easier to get this kind of stuff done in the US as opposed to like on the NHS or in Canada. I don't know, but if you tell them, oh, I'm getting palpitations when I run, maybe that'll kind of key them into doing it for you. I will admit that the problem with any kind of testing that you do is that there's always going to be like false positives, false negatives, may lead you down a pathway of getting more testing you don't need. But if it was me personally, because you're not a population, you're not like a 1 in 100,000, like you're an individual. And so you have to advocate for your own health. And so if you can, I would get this stuff done, but not required. Are we going to save questions to the end or? Yeah. Yeah, let's take a look at the G2G medical form. So this is the top part of the form. This is the section that you fill out. And I tweak the wording on this every year to try to get people to be more honest and to try to get docs more likely to sign off. I think it's pretty good the way that it is. I ask you to be honest. Again, as it says at the top, this isn't to disqualify anybody. This is just to help us and to help your primary care team when you go in for the appointment. Please be honest, especially when it comes to the cardiac issues. Because again, like it doesn't necessarily mean it's just chest pain. You can have short of breath, dizzy, feel nauseous, just be honest. But this begs the question, like, what would you have to say in this form for me to say like, no, absolutely not, you're not running? And to be honest, I don't know. There's very few things that you can say for me to say no. The only two that come to mind would be if you're pregnant beyond the first trimester. So if you're in the first like 3 months, it's probably fine. Anything beyond that, it's just not a good idea. And the other one would be if anybody has like uncontrolled seizures, it's just not a safe thing for you to do. And what uncontrolled means is up for interpretation. Some of that comes down to, again, your primary care doctor. But those are the only two reasons where I'd probably say that this isn't a good thing. But we've had some interesting things over the years. A couple of years ago, there was a girl, actually it was probably a while ago, who had exercise-induced anaphylaxis. Anaphylaxis is a severe allergic reaction where like your throat can close up, you can stop breathing, I mean, you can die. So when she said, I want to do an ultra marathon and I have exercise-induced anaphylaxis, the test and I thought it was a joke. It wasn't. But it's a weird condition where it tends to be very like food and exercise specific. And she only had it when she was boxing. She insisted on running, she was fine, and she did fine. So please don't think that anything you say is going to get you into trouble. Because really, if you're willing to give it a shot, more than likely I'm willing to support you. This is the bottom of the form. This is the section that your primary care provider is supposed to sign. It used to say, you know, like they're medically cleared. I took that out because again, I understand they're not clearing you. It's really them just kind of like screening you and just saying there's no obvious reason why you shouldn't be doing this. Having said that, several of you are going to have an issue where your doc just refuses to sign this due to perceived like liability reasons, especially since the race is in the US. This tends to come up mostly with people in the UK. If you have any issues, I would recommend just leaving a post on the Facebook page to see where other people go to ask for recommendations. In the UK, it seems like one place that a lot of the runners end up going to who have this issue is this London Doctors Clinic. I don't know anything about them. I just know they have a lot of different locations and they tend to specialize in these kind of events. So if you go to the website, it's like, oh, do you want to do MDS? Do you want to do an ultra? Do you want to do a triathlon? And so they're very tuned into this. And so they'll do your ECG, they'll do the whole medical screening, and they'll sign you for. And if you need anything else done, like an echo, I'm pretty sure they help arrange that for you, but I'm not entirely sure. Quick word on the medical team. So we like to have fun. It tends, depending on the year, there's usually 5 or 6 of us on the medical team, which allows us to have one person at each checkpoint during the race. I'm kind of driving around on the course. If you're one of the slower runners, then you will literally see me at every single checkpoint. Having said that, even if it is like 6 doctors, we're not in a hospital, we don't have an ambulance, we're very limited by the supplies that we have. So please like bear with us and use common sense. This is a self-supported race. Even if you're one of the supported runners, that really just involves carrying your luggage. Medical wise, you guys, as far as I'm concerned, you're all like self-supported. So we encourage you to try to take care of as much as you can, like take care of your feet as much as you can, which we'll talk about in a minute. The other reason I mention this is because when you come into a checkpoint, there's only one doc at the checkpoint. We try to keep an eye on you the best that we can, but we could use your help. So if you notice that somebody is struggling, someone's vomiting, someone's like a little unsteady, please let us know. Okay, and just a few words of wisdom regarding like body care and foot care. So especially if you've never done like a staged race before, this is a little bit different than just going and running 50 miles. You have to get up and do it again, do it again, do it again. So if you have a pack that doesn't fit very well, it's pretty common towards after the long stage where the skin is literally just getting ripped off you. So ripped off your back, ripped off your shoulders. When that happens, you know, the damage is already done. People come up with some pretty creative solutions. Like the guy on the left is using socks to kind of like pad his shoulder straps. Sometimes they'll cut up their sleeping mats. We can put tape on there. It's still going to hurt. What we recommend, especially if you haven't done this before, is to just pre-tape. And so the first night at the Grand Canyon, if you bring tape, because I understand this is like hard to do on your own, come down to the medical tent and we have like pre-tape spray and we can tape your shoulders and your back. Just so if there was any friction, it'll be on the tape and not on the skin. As far as foot care goes, like this is the biggest thing that we see like by far. People who never get blisters, you're probably going to get blisters. It's just part of running in sand. There's not a whole lot you can do about it. If you haven't read this book, Fixing Your Feet, I strongly encourage you to get it. It's by a paramedic who takes foot care like very, very seriously. I actually worked with him at a race in Brazil. He brings his own chair for the runners to sit down on. It's a really good book. It's written at a very low level. You can get through it in a couple of hours, but it tells you not only how to prevent getting blisters, but also how to treat blisters. But it goes into like how to modify your shoes, a different way of like lacing your shoes, how to cut your shoe if needed, how to pre-tape so you don't get blisters. Just check it out. If you do get blisters, please have some idea of how to treat it before coming to Grand to Grand. In the past, you have been given a blister kit, which I think you're going to get this year. I'm not entirely sure. It's a good kit, but you have to know what's in the kit. Don't just get it the first day, put it in the bottom of your pack, and then come into the medical tent and be like, yeah, here's my blister kit, fix my feet. If there's something in that you're not going to use, take it out. If there's something else that you want, add it in. But you have to know what's in it, what it's for, how to use it. Especially during the day on the course, we're not going to help you with your feet. End of the day, sure, we'll help you, but we're too busy at checkpoints to be dealing with blisters, so you really need to be self-sufficient. But people speaking it pretty bad, as you can see. When it comes to tape, there's a lot of different tapes. We tend to like Kinesio tape the best because it's smooth, it's stretchy. It doesn't like stick to the nearby toes, and it just looks kind of cool. So if you come into the medical tent, this is probably what you're going to get. And this is stuff that I would encourage you to have with you as well. Yay. As you can see, she has tape on her shoulders, she has tape on her back. Some people by the end of the race, they're just like covered in rock tape head to toe. Yeah, so the last slide, these are just some recommendations, some of them medical, some of them not, just things that I've noticed over the past 10 years. A lot of this is going to seem like common sense, but I say it for a reason. It's because people do this stuff year after year. So please try your food before you come to the race. Don't buy your food in Kanab just because it sounds good. Recovery is huge for a race like this. So if you're not eating, you're not drinking, you're not sleeping, you're going to DNF. Don't bring the same boring oatmeal every morning, because by day 3, you're not going to want to eat it. And then you're screwing yourself for the race. Bring something that you think that you would want to eat hungover, and then you'll probably be okay. Similarly, try to use all your gear before the race. People, again, will buy gear in Kanab. They'll show up with their sleeping mat, like still in the wrapping that it came from the store. They've never used it before. Some people have never been like camping or slept on the ground before. This isn't something you want to figure out once you want to get there. Make sure everything fits and know how to use it. Know how to prevent blisters. Then when you still get blisters, know how to fix them, please. Have some type of electrolyte hydration plan, whether it's salt tablets, something you're putting in your water. Just have a plan and stick with it. Please don't come into the checkpoint asking us how many electrolytes you should take. We have no idea. This is something you need to figure out before you come to Kanab. Again, I would do this. If you haven't done it before, I strongly consider you do it as well. People snore, it gets cold. Make sure you have a bag that's going to keep you warm. Bring earplugs if it's going to keep you up at night. Because again, if you don't sleep and you don't recover, you're not going to be able to wake up and keep running the next day. This is a big one. If you get lost, sick, or injured, it's your fault. Just accept it. Okay. They're going to talk to you about the course later on, but especially if you get injured, it's because you did something you're not supposed to do. And lastly, please just have fun. All right, that's your medical screening lecture. Any questions in the chat?
Before we get into the chat, one thing might be worth talking about, Josh, that you haven't mentioned tonight is hydration, and how much people should, what would your recommendation be to how much they should drink? Because they're entitled to 1.5 liters at every checkpoint, and of course more at the camps. But what would you recommend?
So this kind of keeps changing. The current recommendation that they keep coming back to is to drink to thirst. So your body generally knows what it needs. So if you're thirsty, you should probably drink. I think the problem that many people run into on the course is that they're worried about running out of water. And so they won't drink for miles. And then they see the checkpoint coming and they just like chug what's in the bottle, and they come to the checkpoint and they'll chug another bottle. The problem with that is that when you're running, the blood doesn't go to your stomach, and so it doesn't work very well. So if you keep drinking, you do okay. But if you try to drink too much at once, it just sits in your stomach and it can cause pain and nausea, and it just ends up coming up. So the two main things are just kind of to slowly drink as you're out in the course. And then if again, like drink to thirst. And that's going to be different for everybody. But there's not one specific volume that would be good for everyone. So you have to just kind of listen to your body and go from there.
Okay.
Any questions on medical clearance, or everybody afraid?
Everyone seems to be clear. I don't have any questions in the chat.
Good. Questions?
What would you say over the years, over the last 10 years that we've been holding the Grand to Grand Ultra, Josh, have you noticed any improvement in people being able to look after their feet? Has there been a correlation that more recent years people have done a better job of not having so many blisters, or you have roughly the same percentage each year?
Roughly the same percentage each year. It tends to be this. Some people are very self-reliant, and we won't see them the entire week. But then the group that isn't self-reliant, we see them the entire week. So it kind of like averages out.
Mhm.
But it tends to be pretty consistent. And I'd like to say it's only people who've never done this before, but there are people who've done this many, many times before who still just keep coming into the medical tent.
Mhm.
I don't know. It also tends to be kind of like a social area because we have like hammocks people can sit on. We have lights at night. People like to come in like and hang out, which we try to like put a nip to, but yeah,
Mhm.
no change.
Well, we will be, as I mentioned in the chat, they're providing a Trail Toes blister kit. One of our participants, Vince Antunes, who's got the record for the most number of finishes at G2G with 5, he owns this company called Trail Toes, which developed a very unique anti-friction product. He developed it in the desert, which works extremely well. He very kindly donates blister kits to all of the competitors each year, which contain a combination of Trail Toes cream, syringes, his equivalent of rock tape, etc. And I think you prefer to have people bring those blister kits with them when they come and see the medics because you've got a limited supply of your own stock. Is that right?
Yes.
Mhm.
Yeah, we do bring foot care supplies, but the amount that we bring, we tend to run out by the long stage. So we encourage people to bring their own needles, to bring their own tape. Because otherwise, after the long stage, we just have no tape, and then again, it's on you.
Mhm.
I have a question here. What do you have you had spider bites in previous sessions or editions?
Spider bite now.
No, we've never had one. Not even scorpion.
I mean, people
This is
they
Dave.
see.
Is there
What
any
is it?
sense, Josh, to just
Oh, hey.
mention care due to the vast amount of sand?
Sorry.
I just
I
wondered,
missed the beginning. I missed the beginning of the question.
I just wondered if it's worth talking about special care for so much sand, whether it's gators or other care that I'm not aware of.
I think that's one of the big debates on the races. If you go on the Facebook page and ask about gators, there's always a huge discussion that follows. I think most of the runners use them.
Mm-hmm.
How well they work kind of depends on the gator.
Yeah, it's very much a personal preference. I think some people can get away with just ankle gaiters and not have the whole shoe covered. Some people prefer having the whole shoe covered. So, and some people don't wear gaiters and are quite happy to empty their shoes of sand because your shoes will fill up if you don't, if you don't have them on certain sections of the course, especially in the sand dunes.
Some just wear sandals, so hey.
Yeah, and some wear sandals, socks and sandals. We've had one who wore just sandals, no socks. Yeah. It's really what you're used to. Another question, what do you think of anti-blister cream in the desert?
So people have used it before, whether it's Trail Toes or some other kind of lubricant. They can work well. The only problem is if you get sand in your shoes, it can kind of like stick to it. It can make it hard to clean. That's the only drawback. But most people who use it, works pretty well.
Somebody's asking about snakes. Yeah, we do, see snakes occasionally. I mean, I would say every year, every edition, one or two snakes have been spotted. But we've never had a single incident of a snake bite. And that's mainly because the most venomous snakes there are rattlesnakes, and you'll always hear them before you actually see them. And the rattlesnakes are more scared of humans than the other way around. So they'll typically slither away from you. The only time you've got to be careful is, say you are on the course and you decide to sit down, then just check if you're sitting down on a rock that there's not a rattlesnake under the rock. And then you avoid the situation where maybe the rattlesnake thinks it's being threatened by you. But even then, we've never had in 10 years anyone get bitten. And if you look historically, and Josh might have some more information on this, the vast bulk of rattlesnake bites tend to be dry bites, meaning although they are, venomous, the snakes, in most cases, the venom is not actually injected into the human. So,
I wouldn't say most. I think it's like 10 to 20% tend to be dry bites.
Oh, really? I heard I was looking at a National Geographic the other day, and they said it was over 50%. But what's the situation if we were to get a snake bite, Josh? What would you say people should do, and what can you do about it?
Yeah, so this is something I talk about at the Grand Canyon. So if you were to read a first aid book, it's going to say that if you get bit by a rattlesnake, you should basically sit down and do nothing and wait for help, which isn't very practical advice. If you get bit by a snake, there's no way to know by looking at it, especially in the beginning, whether it's a dry bite or not. So if there's a chance that it could, if it's not a dry bite, you may need antivenom, which is quite expensive for starters. But it means that we have to evacuate you as quickly as possible to one of the nearby hospitals. The quickest way to do that is for you to keep running to the next checkpoint. So if you get bit between, say, checkpoint 1 and 2, don't just sit down and wait for the sweepers, because that just delays everything. You should just keep going to the next checkpoint. If you just left the checkpoint and you're pretty confident they're still there, go back to that checkpoint. But if you're not sure, like if you're towards the back, just keep going to the next checkpoint. You don't need to run per se, but don't just sit down, because the sweepers can't do anything for you. You also don't want to do any kind of like tourniquet. They do that in Australia a lot. But for rattlesnake bites, you don't want to do that. You just want to walk to the next checkpoint. I'll be there. We'll bring you to the hospital. And at that point, it'll be easier to tell by looking at the wound or by checking blood work whether you're actually envenomated or not. If not, then you're possibly even okay to go back and continue the race, depending on what's going on. But if you need anti-venom, that's a whole ordeal. And we're talking thousands and thousands of dollars, which
Mhm,
isn't typically covered by insurance, so don't get that.
mhm. So yeah, that answers Severine's question, because she's wondering if the docs have antidote just in case. No, we don't. You need to go to the hospital for that. And it's actually one of the first things that Dr. Josh does when we arrive in Kanab is check with the hospital, make sure they've got anti-venom antidote in stock.
I'm pretty sure it needs to be refrigerated. It's not something you can just like carry around.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And considering how expensive it was, I wouldn't want to have it anyway.
Sorry.
Considering how expensive it is, I wouldn't
Yeah.
want to be responsible for it.
Yes, yeah. Okay, got a question here from Dilip. I'm a 64-year-old considering doing G2G in 2025. That's great. Entry cutoff time. Do you mean the deadline for registration? We will open registration for 2025 later this month.
Okay.
Yeah. It did MDS 2023, great. Yeah, you can definitely do G2G, yeah. Experience in MDS definitely is a big, it's a big plus for you.
One of the things I was a bit worried about is somebody said to me that G2G requires a lot of navigation skills.
A lot of what, sorry?
Navigation skills, compass skills.
No,
No.
you just see
On
these
the
pink flags, you
contrary.
just follow these flags.
Yeah, there's the pink flag. No, on the contrary. We, our course is very well marked. Yes.
Okay.
In fact, more than I've done MDS in 2009, and I hardly saw any course marking. So no, G2G is different. We mark the course. We have a course marker probably approximately every 50 to 100 meters. Yeah.
Okay. I did Everest Trail Race, which was 160 kilometers in November last year. I got lost and I had to use the bleeper for them to come and rescue me. So I think that's a bit high on my agenda of not wanting to get lost. But okay, that's good. These flags look very prominent.
Oh yes, yeah. If you follow the flags and the polka dot bright fluorescent pink markers, you'll be fine.
Dilip, what you'll find is that our course is extremely well marked because we've had the same course director doing it for the last 8 years. So they know the course extremely well. They know certain areas of cross country that need to be where the number of markers are increased. So people are quite clear as to where they go. And we've especially made nighttime markers with LED lights. So we don't use these chemical ones which tend to fade after a few hours and are a bit unreliable. But we actually have LED markers together with the reflective tape that Tess was talking about. So you can actually see them from several hundred meters away. And as a result, we tend to have a very good success rate, and people don't tend to wander off the course. The only time we do have people sometimes wander off the course is where they're not paying attention to the markers. Maybe they're listening to their music and their head's up in the air, and then they have to realize the rule is if you've gone past a mark, haven't seen a marker for more than 200 meters, then you should go back until you find the marker again. And that would be the way you'd find your way back on the course.
Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome.
You're welcome.
You have people in their 70s doing this, don't you? G2G has, I saw last year, there was somebody in 70. I don't think they finished it though.
Yeah, our oldest finisher so far is 75, and we've had multiple finishers in their 70s. So, we've had plenty of people over the age of 60 finish the race.
Great.
You're doing great.
Okay, I've got plenty of time to prepare for it. So
Yes.
I just saw this. I was Googling, I saw this event. I thought I must start warming up to the discussions. So sorry,
Yeah.
I know your talk was about medical and I just hijacked it on my own feelings.
No, absolutely. You're welcome. It's great. You're better prepared. And just remember, all our Zoom meetups are recorded and they will be they're posted in our G2G YouTube channel. So, so in addition to our Zoom calls, we also have podcasts, which we started this year since October. And there's a lot of just topics that relate to the race that, you know, you can, regarding gear and nutrition, how to train, specifically for G2G. So if you check out our YouTube channel, Grand Ultra YouTube channel, then let me put the link in the message.
Great.
I know we're a little bit off topic here. It's really medical, but I should add that since we're talking about course marking and getting lost, you know, we work with the local Kane County Search and Rescue team for very closely, and we have done for the last 10 years. So they know our course extremely well, and we're tapped into their communications. So every day they're monitoring the progress of all of the participants. And if one was ever to get lost and go off course, they've always said to us, you know, they'd be able to find them within an hour. So we've only had one time in 10 years that we've actually had to call them, and sure enough, they were able to find the person within an hour of going out to look for them. So we've you know, we've got all we think the right sort of risk management and precautions in place to make sure people don't get lost.
Can I just ask one final question, if you don't mind? What's the mortality rate on G2G over the number of years you've done it?
Well, we've had over 1,000 people participate, and we've not had one fatality in that time.
Great.
Okay, so I've just posted the link to our YouTube channel. It's in the chat.
Thank you.
Any more questions specifically for medical, or since you've got us on here, you can ask us any other questions as well. We're planning to have one more Zoom meetup session before the race, which is going to be led by our race commissioner, Garth Reeder. Garth's been our race commissioner for the last 9 years, and he's going to be talking about rules. If you're not sure about any of the rules, he'll be able to clarify them for you. And we'll look out for the date, but that'll be happening sometime in the next month or so before the race.
Okay, looks like everyone's clear.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, everyone, again. Thank you, Dr. Josh.
Okay, I'll bring everything to an end then. So thanks, Josh, for your presentation. It was very informative. We will be seeing you in Kanab, and all the competitors will see you for your medical briefing on the north rim of the Grand Canyon the night before the race. So you'll be able to provide a little bit more detail on certain things there. But is it okay for them to contact you if they've got any particular questions they don't want to bring up? If they want to bring it privately, or do you offer that?
Yeah.
Sure.
That's why my email address is right there.
Yeah, there's Dr. Josh's email there.
Okay, so please, you know, take advantage of Josh's kindness to help you. I'm sure some of you will have personal questions to ask him. So Josh is really experienced. He's seen, you know, over 1,000 people at the Grand Ultra with a whole variety of medical conditions, and he'll be able to give you the guidance you need to give you the reassurance that you need that everything's going to be fine. So thank you once again, everyone, and we look forward to seeing you all in September.
Yeah, not long now. So to everyone that's coming this year, you stay well, keep training smart, okay? No injuries, please. I'll see you in a couple months.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks everyone.